Hello, this is Shawn Jaques. I'm with IBM Tivoli Software, in fact. I'm a manager of Cloud Solutions Product Management, and I'm thrilled to be here. I was asked to be here to talk about some of the key considerations that someone might need to think about when they're moving into cloud. This presentation is going to assume that you have some level of base understanding of what a cloud is, what kinds of different models that might be out there. I'm not going to cover too much of the basics, but I will cover a lot of the service management aspects of what we think at IBM are necessary to really have a truly strong cloud environment that is fully secure and delivers the right levels of service, is able to provide that level of reporting back to management and to your users and stakeholders, etc. All those kind of attributes that would comprise as a true cloud experience. So with that, let's get into this presentation a little bit. So I will talk a little bit about why cloud computing. I think that's pretty obvious, so I won't spend too much time on there. Some of the stages about how you would move into cloud. So in other words, how would you think about what kinds of management features are important to deploy and when are you going to deploy them? The next thing I'll talk about is some of the quick tips to consider. I've got 8 different tips in moving into a cloud environment that I'll cover one by one that I think are important things to consider that help you set yourself up for the right kind of cloud experience. Lastly, I'll have a very quick thing on why IBM, not too much promotion here, and then maybe some next steps to get going. So the next slide I'll move into. This term generates over 54 million results on Google. And the answer is, or actually the question is, what is cloud computing? That's right, 54 million hits. So it's obviously a big topic. It's something that's really critical. We chose the Watson thing to kind of illustrate some of the things that are going on at IBM. I don't know how many people are familiar on this webcast with what Watson was, but it was a program that IBM built to compete on Jeopardy. And when you think about what has to happen on a Jeopardy game show, there's different categories. They could be very wide-ranging. The questions are posed in the form of an answer, and then you have to come up with the question. So you have to pick out different text out of that answer, and then figure out what the right question would be. So IBM had built this system to go compete on Jeopardy, and it did well. It was interesting, but what's really interesting about it is where you could think about how that technology could change and how it could become something truly amazing. And I just think about from a medical application, for instance, what might you be able to do if you were to place some contextual information and come up with more accurate diagnoses, etc. So anyway, it's kind of a neat project that IBM had done, but just a different way to kind of present this idea of cloud computing. It's obviously one of the most important things going on right now. I think it's more than just a term. I think it's more than just grid computing or SOA or other things like that. I think it's very much changing. Now, the term might go away, but I think that the business model that people are trying to move to, the kinds of values that they're trying to get out of cloud computing are absolutely here to stay. This next slide talks a little bit about why customers, well, not why customers, but why cloud computing is important in that it can enable you to reinvent your business. It can enable you to do, things like deliver services much faster. Focus on having a process that's different from other kinds of companies. Allow you to meet, changing expectations from your customers very quickly because you're able to more flexibly and dynamically adjust your IT environment to support the needs of the business. On the other hand, too often people are thinking about this as a complete sea change, that they have to do it in a new data center, that they have to completely start over again. And really, I think that it's more about rethinking IT, thinking about different ways to deliver your IT services faster, but doing it in a way that is more of an evolution from where you are today. So a lot of companies are still consolidating and virtualizing servers. They haven't really moved into some of the more advanced virtualization capabilities. There are next stage of virtualization automation type capabilities that might add things like billing and self-service UIs. They're all aimed at starting to move someone into a cloud environment. And I think this transformation, moving in from a virtualized environment into a true cloud environment that has all the attributes of cloud, is probably going to take most companies or entities 3 to 4 years on the early side and closer to 5 years to really do the whole transition. And this is, it's not just my opinion. I think that's the opinion I've seen shared by a lot of the analysts out here covering the space. So with that said, as we said, getting ready for cloud doesn't mean that you have to completely reinvent your IT infrastructure. It's really trying to leverage the kinds of tools and capabilities that you have today in your traditional environment, extend those out to cover, and add to them and modify them as necessary, but move them into more of this cloud environment. So for a lot of companies, that means taking what you've already done with virtualization and extending that with your existing tooling or new tooling to cover things like process automation. The net is that you can start to reduce the cost of delivering those services right away by adding that process automation, by simplifying and streamlining the process that's required to request a new virtual machine, get that new virtual machine provisioned. That virtual machine could have a number of different characteristics, or it could have a database on it or an application. You could potentially route approvals to the right people. All that kind of process automation could, certainly take a lot of the time out of a start to finish type of provisioning action. So I guess if I could leave you with one message, it would be to start your cloud journey with the end in mind. And so too often we've seen a lot of these consolidation and virtualization projects they're very focused on tactical hardware savings, or very simply on cost reduction. And what ends up in a lot of the clients we see is that they have these areas of compute that don't really have good automation. They're often thought of as this area that really people don't know how things are connected to each other. They don't know how to account for the different resources, and that's fine in a lot of environments where there's the virtualization is really a small piece of the environment. But when it starts to get up to 25% of your environment or 50% of your environment, now all of a sudden a huge percentage, half your costs are going into this new virtualized environment, and they're being, they're just a big blob of stuff that's over there, and with little accountability, little process control, little little visibility into what's happening and how those applications are performing. So with that, we think that in order to truly move to an effective and efficient cloud, you need to virtualize, of course. You need to standardize as much as you can. Now, there's certainly reasons for having different levels of operating system, or having different platforms that you run on, et cetera. And you need to be automated. So virtualize, standardize, and automated. And really what it gets to is, thinking about the right kinds of questions. What is the hardware that you want to virtualize on? What are the workloads that are most important to virtualize first, second, third? How do you secure them? How do you back them up, et cetera? From a standardization perspective, what hypervisor is your standard? Does it make sense to have other hypervisors in your environment? Other than the one you have, you might have multiple hardware platforms and therefore multiple hypervisors. There's often good reasons for that. It could be proximity to data. It could be where your legacy applications are running. It could be that there's performance characteristics of a particular application that makes sense to run on a different hardware or hypervisor. There are many good reasons for having different hypervisors. but deciding on what those standards are going to be ahead of time, and then moving your organization and toward those set of standards will certainly help to prepare you for cloud. And then lastly, the automated. What kind of services do you want to offer? Is it simply a virtual machine on demand? Is it an application server on demand that you're going to add application content into it? What are the kinds of important business services, and how do you control those services? What are the processes that you have? They could vary certainly between providing a virtual machine to a dev test environment versus providing a application server into production. Those are different processes, require different levels of controls, and therefore you need to think about those kinds of applications, et cetera, differently. And then the last two questions I have here: how do you charge back, and then what is the governance model? These are two things a lot of people put off till later, and that's fine. And some, if you're not moving very quickly into cloud, but it's certainly something that you want to have a strategy for how you're going to get better information. Because as I mentioned earlier, it might start out small, but these environments tend to gain a lot of traction and grow very quickly, and then all of a sudden you've got a big area where there's no cost accountability. So just a few of the attributes when you're thinking about this journey to from virtualization into cloud, actually from physical to virtualized to cloud, there are a number of different attributes. This isn't a complete and comprehensive list, but it's it's fairly good. There are different things that you might want to start with. Now, you're probably going to start with virtualization. That makes sense. There's some quick benefits there from a cost perspective to gain. You could just be virtualizing your compute power, but you could also be thinking about storage virtualization. How do I abstract the unique characteristics of the different SAN hardware that I have into a very virtualized. How do I virtualize that just like I virtualize my servers? Now, those are things that you should ask, because they can certainly simplify your your server virtualization if you've got a good storage virtualization network strategy, et cetera, that's going along with it. Provision and secure. So, provisioning is one of the things a lot of people think about first. It's a way to automate some tasks that tend to be manual. There are, some things you want to think about. How high do I need to scale? Do I want to provide a self-service UI? And if so, when do I want to provide that? What kind of catalog do I want to provide to my users? What kind of logging and auditing do I want to do of all these activities, et cetera? From a security perspective, a lot of the tools, if you're thinking about a private cloud especially, a lot of the tools that you're using in your traditional environment have complete applicability into your private cloud. So, access control, single sign-on, things like, identity management. So managing those identities, making sure that, the right people only have, are able to get into the right systems, and you want to keep the bad guys out. So all that kind of, security policy and tools and techniques that you use in your traditional environment certainly applies in the private cloud. It starts to get a little bit more tricky when you get out into public cloud. So now all of a sudden you're dealing with sets of access and controls to resources that are a little bit outside your control. But there are tools today for that can also extend. So you could federate identity, for instance, out to those external cloud resources. Now, monitoring and manage, another important thing that a lot of people put off. And again, what I'm trying to illustrate here is that this journey, there's a number of different characteristics here, but you can choose to deploy them at different points in your journey depending on the priority to you. So you might be starting off with a dev test environment, for instance, where monitoring is not as important as it might be in a production environment. Therefore, you kind of delay the implementation of monitoring and some of the management until you get a little bit further down your journey and you start to think about production things. Now there are some risks with that, because if you use some of your monitoring in your development environment, you're more likely to see success in your production environment. So you got to think about it from that perspective as well. But Just trying to say that I'm not saying all these things need to be there on day one. It's a journey to get there, and you should think about the things over time. Orchestration of workflow is one of the things I think a lot of the cloud vendors talk about. What it's really trying to do here is to take a variety of tasks that are happening. Some of those can be very restricted to a particular server, so I need to install software and configure software. It could be in the form of an image with some configuration on top of that, but there's also it needs to be connected with the network. It needs to be, the virtual LAN has to be set up properly for that particular virtual server. You need to make sure that there's some storage allocated to it. You might want to set up a backup policy. So orchestrating all that so that when there is a service request that can, that says I need a particular three-tiered application deployed, or I need more power for that, it orchestrates all those different tasks across those disciplines and have them, added to a particular cloud at the right order and in the right, automated process. And then lastly here that I have on this slide is the metering and rating. And I mentioned this a couple times. It's certainly important to, at a minimum, start to measure what you're using out there. Whether you decide to charge back to your other departments is another question, but at least being able to understand what you have internally, where are the big consumers of resources is going to help you later on. Because one thing you'll find is you have to have the same kind of service level discussions that you've had in your traditional environment all over again when you start moving into cloud. All the business users want, 5 nines of availability. They want instant response times from web applications. They want all this kind of service level, but there's a cost for that, and unless you're tracking it and understanding what is happening in your environment, it's tough to have those right discussions and decide on what the right level of service is for the different applications. So moving into the next slide, I start with the tips. I mentioned there would be 8 tips, so there's the first tip. The first one is about automating procedures in the service lifecycle. We believe this will help you reduce labor and achieve faster service delivery. So if you think about a service, there's a cycle that starts at the lower left of this little diagram where you need to create the service. And you need to decide initially what is the scope of that service, what are the kinds of SLAs that you want to provide with that service. And, a service, as I mentioned, could be, something very simple like a virtual machine container and you put your own image into it, or the user would. Or it could be something more complex like a web application server that the that the user is going to put in their application content. They're going to connect it in with a database, etc. So you need to offer that service. So once you've created it, it needs to be offered, and there's generally the approach to offering services is through some sort of a catalog. You need to offer a subscription, so decide on who can request the services, so that could be a kind of a roles, responsibilities type of configuration, but really trying to make sure that the people who are requesting the services have the right access to request those services. The next stage here is the actual deployment of the service. Well, here you're actually doing deployment in an automated way based on the request that has come in. So your users would come in through some sort of self-service UI, hopefully. They would request that this action be performed, and then the service would be deployed. Now, there could be a whole set of actions in there that are required to turn that to do that actual service, to get that service out and provisioned, and there could be a number of process steps that require approvals that are behind the scene. That's something that you have to configure according to your environment and what's important to your business processes. The next thing is to manage the service ops. So make sure that you're controlling the changes, make sure you understand what's happening out there in that service, that you're monitoring the performance of servers, the performance of your storage and your network, et cetera, so you understand the impacts to your overall business service that you're providing. It also includes the aspects of billing would be in here. And then lastly, the service termination. And depending on what type of service, if it's a dev machine, for instance, you might set up a policy that says, at the end of each day, I'm going to automatically terminate all virtual servers that are out there in the environment unless, they have prearranged to have that server run past midnight. That may be a bad example depending on the environment, but I have seen some clients that are actually doing those kinds of policies. But the idea here is that, some way you should be able to terminate services, reclaim those resources, allow them to be redeployed, and it requires some level of understanding what's happening in that service. How can it be destroyed, et cetera. With all that, we do think that what we've seen from some of the clients that we've been talking to is that the wait time for getting these services can be reduced very significantly. The amount of time that it takes to build environments, the automation of these tasks, can reduce things from weeks to hours. We at IBM have used these tools and technologies in our own development operations and seen these kinds of savings. The net is that your users, the ones that are used to being out there on the web, they can go to Amazon .com and order a book, and with two-click processing, they have their book being shipped to them, and they kind of see a similar experience over on Amazon Web Services. Now, they're coming to you as the IT manager, and they're saying, how can you give me a similar type experience that I'm getting from the web? And that's exactly what this service lifecycle is aimed to do, is to give them the kind of service that they're expecting, very fast service with the kind of controls and process automation that you need to be comfortable that service is being deployed in a way that's not exposing your company or your data. All right, so with that, I'm going to move to slide 2, or to tip number 2. Another thing that we see with virtualized environments is that when they tend to get large, what happens is lots of people will deploy images. They'll create their own images. They'll deploy images that were created for one purpose, but they're going to use them for another. And you end up with this image sprawl, it's often referred to. And we think that, through a proactive image management process, you can better control the level of images that are out there, and that really helps reduce the risk that some of these images weren't, deployed with the proper level of security. Perhaps they, are placed into parts of your environment that you don't want them placed into, be it based on the type of workload, et cetera. So really, what image management is about is, helping the users to build the right kind of image from the standards that you guys have established, helping to then deploy those images or instantiate them into servers. And they could be, multi-tiered topologies. So it doesn't necessarily mean a single image into a single server, but helping them really to deploy their application as images and do the configuration, et cetera. And then lastly, to manage the versions, to understand what's happening, across your environment. How many of these servers or these images are essentially the same image, and perhaps you can clean it up, save a lot of data, et cetera, by consolidating down on images. So, it's only one word on this chart, but it says analyzing. It's really about thinking, what can I do, to better understand what my images are out there? Can I understand what the differences are? Can I, take that information and consolidate down my image footprints, saving storage, saving, the risk, et cetera, that these images are being used improperly. The next one is secure your business assets with security foundational controls. So we think that security can be broken down into these 6 different categories that helps just understand the different kinds of security that you might want to apply. So access and identity, data and information, release management, security event information management, physical security, and threat and vulnerability management. And by thinking about each one of these categories and how you've applied it in your physical environment and how you might extend it out into your virtualized or cloud environment, we think is really the key to coming up with a secure cloud environment. As I mentioned, a lot of the technologies that you use today in your traditional data center will probably work just fine in your virtualized infrastructure. So if you're doing access and identity, for instance, those same kinds of policies that you've applied for your Windows servers, for instance, are going to work on Windows servers in a virtual environment. Just as you're going to continue to need things like threat and vulnerability management, regardless of whether it's a physical server or a virtual server. Now, it might require a little bit different implementation for sure, but the kinds of at least the framework for thinking about the different security issues that you might have, we think is fairly well represented here on this slide. Moving to the next slide, this is tip 4. Allow the end users to use self-services without being an IT expert. So, you have what we've really seen in the last year is the shift from IT users being the predominant requesters of technology, of deployments, to more lines of business users, and because of that, these lines of business users, they don't want to understand all the ins and outs of deploying an image and the operating system and all that stuff. They just want to be able to add more power to their application, or they want to be able to do some testing on their database application, etc. So what we think is needed is this simple UI. And as I mentioned, these customers, these same people, they're out there, or these users, they're out there using the web, and they know what it's like to go out to to some shopping website and to find what they need and to do it very quickly and have that thing sent to them automatically, or have a download of software from a web store come to them very quickly. They want that level of service from their internal IT people, and if they don't get it, they're going to start looking at these public cloud services. They're going to look at the Amazons or the Salesforces or et cetera, because a lot of those companies can provide that level of service that the business user desires. So there are risks with that, of course, having moving some of the control outside of your organization and additional data integration needs, et cetera. But what we've seen, at least in the last couple of years, is this strong desire to have a very web portal-like self-service UI where they can easily go out there and without any learning select the kinds of services they want deployed, have them deployed. We've seen that just in some of the implementations we've had with our clients that labor cost reductions in the IT department of 50% are not uncommon at all. All right, moving over to the next slide, tip 5, improve service availability with your cloud with automated recovery. So I think because a lot of the cloud projects start in a dev test environment, this tends to get left off, where people don't really think about of high availability or disaster recovery, because they're really worried about can I scale out a test? Can I provision a system very quickly and have it available so that I can, run a build out there and see if my application works, et cetera. They're less, at this point, concerned about the operational aspects of that application. What's going to happen when it gets out into production and you need to have, the 5 nines of availability? Well, there are some benefits from the hypervisor that does help with the application availability, but what happens inside of the virtual machine is often left to the user of the app or the builder of the app to go configure it for high availability or recovery. So what we're saying here is trying to encourage you to think about how critical is this business application? Do I need to think about redundant systems? That could be virtual redundant systems. Do I need to, set up disaster recovery policies? Do I need to have, data backup? And what kind of data backup would that be? Is it a frequent snapshot? How do I make that snapshot very efficient? So that I'm not, creating, tons and tons of data. Deduplication is one technique that helps. Incremental snapshots are another technique, etc. So really here, what the tip is to think about the kinds of applications that you have and think that eventually they are going to be moved into production instance of cloud, and therefore what are the availability characteristics that are required for this application, and how do I affect that with a cloud model? Tip 6, visualize system performance status. So here, what we're really focused on is more of the production type apps, though as I mentioned earlier, I think it's critical that you start thinking about this earlier in the development cycle and the testing cycle, because those kinds of applications you can identify through your testing and through some of the monitoring tools that you might use, some of the performance hits that are likely to occur in production. Understanding how monitoring could affect your application once it's deployed in production is much better to understand that if you've used that same monitor in the test environment ahead of deploying it into production. You can get a fair amount of information from the hypervisors to tell you about the virtual machines and how well those virtual machines are running, if they're up and down, what kind of resources are they drawing on. What you can't tell most often is, again, what's happening inside that virtual machine. Is my operating system performing? Is my application performing like I expected to? And then even more tricky than that is, how is my multi-tiered application working together across multiple VMs? So how does a transaction that flows through multiple application servers into a database, back through through a directory server, et cetera, whatever those transaction flow points are, how does that get represented from a performance perspective, and how do I troubleshoot when I do have a problem? And without the right kinds of visualization tools, to help you understand where bottlenecks might be and what you need to go work on, it's really hard to set up a virtualized environment, a highly cloud environment that is is going to deliver the level of availability that you expect for your critical business apps. Just some of the benefits that we've seen from some of our clients, by proactively responding to these performance, we've seen improved service availability at least 4%. So we're talking people in the 90s getting it closer up to the 5 nines they might need. We've seen reduced labor costs associated with monitoring and capacity planning. So I think there's some tangible benefits here that you can get from monitoring, as well as the peace of mind that your application is performing like you expect it to. So tip 7 is about protecting the integrity of the data on the virtual machines. So here we are talking a lot about the data protection and the kinds of you're thinking about the kinds of data protection that you want. So there are techniques that would help you very efficiently take snapshots of data to save that in a way that doesn't impact your performance, because it's offloading it from the virtual machine into another area for processing. You can do incremental, so that you're doing a very light incremental data capture, so that you aren't capturing a full snapshot or a full backup every time. One of the things that I think is also really important to think about when you're looking at your backup policy or your data protection policy is, what is your recovery? How fast can you get stuff back? And one of the things that is important is to have different kinds of options. So one, you might want to recover the full virtual machine, the full volume, the full image. recover that full virtual machine. On the other hand, you might just have a file that's out there that needs to be recovered. So if you're running, for instance, an Exchange server in a cloud, and you wanted to recover a single mailbox entry from that file, you don't want to have to, recover the whole Exchange server. You'd much rather have an option to recover just a single file from that. And you'd like to do it in an efficient way, so being able to pick the file out without having to mount the full snapshot first would be a lot more efficient. So just thinking about these kinds of data protection and technologies, etc. And the number eight tip that I have here is make sure that you track these services and recover the costs. As I mentioned, a lot of times these costs, they start small, pilot projects in the cloud, don't have a ton of servers, and they might be just the development environment or the test environment, et cetera. But as they grow, and we've seen a lot of growth in customers that started to adopt cloud, this becomes a bigger percentage of your environment. And you need to at least be able to meter that from the get-go, we think. And you want to be able to eventually be able to bill back based on the usage of the shared assets. This helps not only with understanding where the costs are coming from, but also helps in those service level discussions that you might have with your business owners about what level of service this application should have, and understanding the cost of the different levels of service is certainly an important factor in that kind of decision. So my next slide, really just a recap of what we talked about. The dynamic resource provisioning and process automation. We believe that the benefit there is that you can maximize your IT investments, and you can speed your delivery, and you can drive down costs. Image management is about eliminating sprawl, and eliminating sprawl eliminates risk. It eliminates potential duplicate data, etc. One of the things that just a maxim that I think is important for cloud is that more things are harder to manage. If you have fewer things, it's easier to manage. So, controlling the number of images that you have out there, controlling the number of tools that you're using to manage your virtualized environment, the number of disintegrated products, I think is an important thing of getting down to a more manageable set. And so some people have said, well, consolidation on x86 is the way to go, but they end up with thousands of virtual machines on hundreds of servers, whereas perhaps other platforms might have served as a more dense consolidation, had fewer things to manage, and reduced your labor costs significantly. So thinking about that in the overall context. Security, again, it's about keeping letting the good guys in, keeping the bad guys out. From a private cloud perspective, most of the same kinds of things that you do in your data center today are applicable in your cloud environment. So think about the framework that we provided earlier, and how each one of those areas might have some implications when you move to cloud. Service catalog is certainly an important way, especially with the self-service portal, of providing this ability for users to select their services that they require without involving the IT department. It certainly minimizes repetitive tasks. Most of the benefits that we've seen from internal private clouds come from this particular item here, is that the users can now get the kinds of services that they need in a matter of minutes rather than in days or weeks when you require a lot of manual approvals, etc. High availability and failover. It's important to keep those systems and services running against the service levels that you have agreed to with your business and stakeholders. There are a number of technologies that help with the hypervisor, but you also need to think about how critical is this application, and do I need to apply some of the high availability failover to the application sides that are in addition to what's provided by hypervisor, etc. Performance monitoring, it's really important to know not only what's happening with the VM, but what's happening inside of the VM and across application components that are running in multiple VMs. And you really just don't get that information unless you're looking at some additional monitoring tools that look inside. Backup and recovery, very, very critical to make sure that you've got recovery. You have to be careful also that you're not just getting, a crash consistent snapshot. It's important that if you have a critical business application, there could be transactions in flight. Your backup system needs to be aware of those transactions that are in flight, quiesce the application as appropriate, get those into a good backup state, then take a snapshot. Otherwise, you're going to lose data when you take simple snapshots, and certainly data loss it can kill any business. We've seen examples where large-scale data loss has wrecked businesses, and we're not suggesting that not having a backup would drive you to that, but certainly thinking about the kinds of applications you're trying to protect, how critical they are to your business, and applying the right backup and recovery technology, I think is the critical message here. And then the last tip, just to recap, the tracking services and cost recovery. It really, all these business cases need to be supported with facts, and you're not going to get your facts unless you're actually monitoring what's happening out there in your cloud environment. So, start from day one, at least getting some information about what's out there. It might take you some effort to turn that information into, real data that you can leverage from a business case perspective, if you're just doing the metering. But the important thing is go collect that information, then you have it, and you can have these kinds of discussions with your business owners. So we think that technology, or that the business owners are the ones who are driving a lot of the adoption to cloud. And when you're thinking about, should my organization move to cloud, we've thrown a couple of questions out here, which we think, kind of help you think about that. The first one, is your organization achieving the levels of innovation required to meet in today's environment? Innovation, being flexible, being able to respond very quickly is certainly one of those things that very critical to getting your to being more flexible, to surviving in today's very dynamic market. The other ones here, how quickly can you drive lucrative ideas into action? That's about flexibility. The other two, how do you, the next one here is how do you foster innovation or restrict it? That means that you got to apply some process controls to it, So you want to, you want to be able to, foster this innovation. You want to set some controls around it, limit it, to get it going in the right direction. But you need to think about how can I do that in a way that is truly beneficial for my organization. And then lastly, and I don't want to downplay costs and CapEx because operating expenses and capital expenses, because quite frankly, when we've surveyed clients and what their important reasons to moving to cloud, after flexibility, the next 3 to 4 reasons all centered around cost. So, lowering the cost of the software, lowering the cost of the hardware, reducing the cost of labor, all those things, really come down into cost. And yet at the same time, those business owners are asking for better and faster IT services being delivered to them. So really, if you don't think you're meeting the needs of the business owner on here, I do think cloud is a good, at least offers a lot of promise. Now, IBM, this is a very generic slide, honestly, that we do try to provide a very comprehensive approach. So we have the hardware, software services approach to delivering all kinds. There are public cloud services available from our global services business. There are infrastructure management services and management assets that come from a Tivoli. There are workload deployment capabilities are focused on business workloads that are being deployed, coming out of our middleware group. Also thinking about some of the development technologies and how they would help someone actually develop cloud applications and then deploy them into the organization. We've built good integration between our development assets over in Rational and our deployment assets over in the Tivoli brand. So really what I'm trying to say here is that, IBM really can meet all your needs, and we think that, we have the broadest portfolio in the environment. And I'm done pitching our little wares. So I realize that I've used all the time talking. I didn't give much chance or any chance really for questions. I do have my email on this slide, so sjaqes@us.ibm.com, and I am willing to take emails. I know that's a risky proposition, but if you do have any questions, if you would like to reach out to me for some reason or another, please do. No hate mail, please. I'm trying to be as good as I can here. So with that, I think I've got to end the webcast to keep us on time.